college last year and she's in her first job. Just last night, she came home and said to me how her car wash went from $25 to $35. So she's learning inflation real time just from a simple car wash. And that's, a 35, 40% increase in one shot. So it's only $10. But when you do that percentage wise, and when it's, only $10 is meaningful to folks when it could be, that is, a pound of deli meat or a dozen eggs and a half a gallon of milk. I mean, it's food inflation itself is through the roof. But then when you layer things on top of it, like, as you mentioned, health insurance or the car wash or whatever it may be, all of these things add up and wages are not keeping up with the rest of consumer inflation. And that's the real driver here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Last week, I took my two boys, DC area, Five Guys Burgers. It's just kind of it's a very popular.
I've got one 2 miles down the house from me.
There you go. So we're at Five Guys and I'm trying to teach my kids, some financial education. So we go in there and 3 burgers and we shared fries. And they said, "Dad, can we get a Coke?" I was like, "Guys, we live 2 miles from the house. You can drink a Coke when you get home." But then I showed them the bill. 3 burgers and fries was $52. Right. And so I keep telling them, okay, let's talk about minimum wage. Let's talk about taxes. So how much did that $52, burgers really cost? I was like, hey, I'm in this certain tax bracket. And so in reality, that's almost $100 meal when you calculate all those differences. So yeah, I mean, this food inflation, it's the real deal. So
to your point, you went out for burgers and it's costing you $50.
Yeah. It's just
just burgers.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And
it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, you're not going to a restaurant, sitting down, having a server. You're just walking in, having burgers with your kids, and it's $52. I can't even imagine what it costs in Connecticut where you live, or New York City. It's probably another 25% higher. But my point being, my goodness, it's expensive. Your 22-year-old daughter is really getting a lesson in what the inflation is doing to us. So
yep.
Where was that moment when you knew you couldn't stay there forever? Okay, the derivatives, I got this. When was that moment when you said, it's time to do something different?
So I'll take a backstory for you first. So, excuse me, sorry, I'm fighting the cold here. I'm an only child raised by a single mom, and my mother was a deaf education teacher in a small town in upstate New York. And, you think back 40 years ago, special education, was a different animal back then. They didn't, children, the teachers and the parents didn't have the resources available to them that they have today. And I grew up with twin beds, and it took me a long time to figure out why I had twin beds. And because they would lump all the kids with special needs into mainstreaming classrooms, my mother would have kids throughout the different spectrums and different ages from 6 to age 19, 20 years old. And they would, on any given day, a student would come in and would be suffering from mental abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And she would take that student and say, you know what, you're going to come home with us. We'll give you a hot meal in the warm bed and we'll go see the superintendent, figure it out tomorrow. Now, obviously, you can never do that in today's world. You'd get sued and all that stuff. But, I was sort of I learned very early on that you step in when you can and not when you have to. And, she always had this phrase of, we might not be able to change the world today, but we can change the world around us. And so that's something that really stuck with me at, probably age 10, 11, 12, and was maybe buried away in me and sort of forgot about it. And then fast forward 20 so years later, the financial crisis hit 2008, 2009. And what happened then was that banks were basically giving loans to people that couldn't afford the mortgage. And so people started losing their homes, banks were foreclosing on them. And I thought, well, banks don't want to take these properties onto their balance sheet and the homeowners don't want to lose their home. So why can't we put the banks and the borrowers together and have them figure it out? Because back then, 20 years ago, people still use fax machines. And so people were sending in their applications, asking for their forbearance, but they were getting all stacked up. And then the applications were getting mixed together with other applications and just kind of getting lost in the shuffle. And I simply said to a colleague of mine, I said, why can't we just put the banks and the borrowers together in a room? And he said, Chris, I'll bet you a beer you can't do it. And so it was literally a simple beer bet. And so at the time, Goldman Sachs, where I was working, was not viewed very favorably by the general public. And I thought, well, how can we do this? And so I reached out to a local community center where I live here in Connecticut, asking if we could use their space, and was trying to figure out, how do we reach out to these banks? My Chris Meek from Goldman Sachs, my Chris Meek from Connecticut, what's it going to be? And so I decided to be Chris Meek from Goldman Sachs to show my, financial experience. And long story